She was sitting on the porch steps in a thin house dress, in November. No coat, no shoes. Her hands were shaking.
Grandma,
And when
it's me.
Jordan's
We have
car
to go.
headlights
Now.
swept across
What's
her
wrong,
face,
child? It's so
her eyes
late.
didn't light up
No
with
time.
relief.
Get your coat.
They filled with
Mama,
shame.
I thought they
Mama,
took you.
his voice
Are you
broke before he
okay?
could finish the word. Subscribe,
here
like,
now.
and drop in the comments where
safe.
you're watching from, because what you're about to witness is going to hurt before it heals. The last time Jordan Calloway had driven down Birchwood Lane, he had a box of his belongings in the back seat and tears he refused to let fall. That was 14 months ago.
I love you.
He had been 26 years old, standing in the living room of the house he'd grown up in. The house
can't
where his
believe
mother
you
may have
did
nursed him
this!
through chicken
What?
pox.
I don't
Taught him
understand.
to tie
You know
his shoes
exactly
on the
what you
bottom
did.
stair.
Please
Burned
stop
birthday
this.
cakes every
All
single
right,
year
let's
because
move.
she always
I'm
forgot to
ready.
set the timer.
Stay close.
Standing there while she looked at him
So
with tired
cold.
eyes and said, "Jordan, maybe it's time you find your own place. You're a grown man." He hadn't argued. He was too proud to argue. Too hurt to ask
I
why
have
now.
some difficult
Why suddenly?
news.
Why are
What
you
is
saying
it?
this like you've been
Is everything
rehearsing
okay?
it?
It's about
He
the
just
estate.
nodded, picked up his dignity off the floor like loose change, and left. What Jordan didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that May hadn't written those words. She had been handed them. His name was Gerald Booth. 53 years old, silver-tongued, with the kind of smile that made women in church fans trust him immediately. He had met May at a grief support group 8 months after Jordan's father passed. May, who had spent 31 years being someone's wife, someone's mother, May, who didn't know what to do with silence, had found Gerald's attention warm like a fire on a cold floor. Within 4 months, he was sleeping in her house. Within 6, he had started leaving Jordan's mail unopened on the counter. Within 8, he had convinced May, gently, carefully, like water wearing down stone, that her son was holding her back from her next chapter. That a grown man living at home was a sign of something wrong. That she deserved more space, more peace, more him. May was lonely. Loneliness is its own kind of hunger. And Gerald fed her just enough to keep her grateful. So she had said the words. And Jordan had left. 14 months later, Jordan was living in a studio apartment in Columbus, Ohio, working as an HVAC technician, eating dinner alone most nights over a kitchen counter that never felt like a table. He called May on Sundays. The calls were getting shorter. "How are you, Mama?" "Fine, baby. Just fine." He always waited a beat too long after fine, listening for something underneath it. But she never said more. And he told himself that meant she was okay. He told himself a lot of things that year. He told himself he wasn't angry. He told himself he understood. He told himself that when people show you where you rank in their life, you accept it quietly and move on. But every time he passed a Walmart and saw an older woman squeezing cantaloupes the way May always did, pressing with her thumb, sniffing the stem, something in his throat would close up like a fist. It was his coworker, Darius, who finally said the thing out loud. They were eating lunch in the truck, November wind rattling the windows, and Jordan had just gotten off a Sunday call that lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds. He was staring at his phone like it had insulted him. "You good?" Darius asked. "She sounded tired," Jordan said. "Your mom?" "Yeah." He set the phone face down on his thigh. "She always says she's fine. But she sounds like someone who's trying real hard to convince herself." Darius chewed slowly. "When's the last time you actually saw her?" Jordan didn't answer. "Jordan." 14 months. Darius stopped chewing. "Man," he said quietly, "that's your mama. She's the one who. I know what she did. I'm saying, that's your mama." Those 4 words sat in the cab of the truck like something heavy. Jordan drove home that night with them still ringing. "That's your mama." He lay in bed staring at the water stain on his ceiling that he'd always meant to fix, and he thought about the way her voice had sounded on the phone. Not tired. Thin. Like she was being careful about what she said. Like someone was nearby. He told himself he was overthinking. He fell asleep. He dreamed about her hands, the way she used to press her palm flat against his forehead when he was sick. Cool. Steady. Like she was transferring something. Like she could pull the fever out through sheer will. He woke up at 4 a.m. and booked the drive back to Millhaven. He didn't call ahead. He told himself it was because he wanted it to be a surprise. Bring her flowers, maybe, show up on a Tuesday like the kind of son who just appears because he loves you. But the truth he wouldn't say out loud, was that he was afraid. Afraid that if he called, she'd tell him not to come. Afraid that Gerald would answer the phone. Afraid that the careful, rehearsed voice he'd been hearing for 14 months would say, "Oh, Jordan, you don't need to do that. I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine." And he would believe it again, and hang up, and go back to his water-stained ceiling and his 4-minute calls. So he just drove. 4 hours. Through gray Ohio sky and barren Indiana fields, and into the west edge of Illinois where Millhaven sat quiet and mid-sized and familiar, with its brick storefronts and Catholic church steeple and the Dairy Queen on Route 9 where May used to take him after every dentist appointment, even when he had cavities, because she believed that a hard thing deserved a sweet thing after. He turned onto Birchwood Lane at 6:47 p.m. The streetlights had just clicked on. And that's when he saw her. On the porch steps. Thin house dress. No coat. November. Her bare feet on cold concrete. Her arms wrapped around herself, not in comfort, but in that particular way people hold themselves when holding on is the only option left. The headlights caught her face. May Calloway. 61 years old. The woman who had once filled every room she entered. The woman who sang off-key to Anita Baker while washing dishes. The woman who kept butterscotch candy in her cardigan pocket and pressed dollar bills into the hands of anyone who looked like they needed it more than she did. She looked like she had been sitting there a long time. She looked like she wasn't sure anyone was coming. And when she finally recognized his car, when the shape of him behind the wheel registered in her eyes, she didn't stand up. She didn't wave. She pulled her arms tighter around herself. And looked down. Like she was ashamed to be found. Jordan didn't turn the engine off right away. He just sat there. Foot on the brake. Headlights still washing over her. Like some part of his brain needed an extra second to process what his eyes were already telling him, that the woman on those steps was not the woman he had left 14 months ago. May had always been solid. That was the word for her. Solid the way old oak trees are solid, not loud about it, not showy, just there. Unmovable. The kind of woman who showed up to everything and never asked for credit. Who could stretch a Sunday pot roast into 3 days of meals and make each one feel intentional. Who stood 5'4" but somehow always seemed taller. The woman on the porch steps looked like something had been slowly taken from her. Her collarbone showed above the neckline of her house dress in a way it never used to. Her hair, which she had kept pressed and neat every Sunday of his entire childhood, was loose and uncombed, flattened on one side like she'd been sleeping on it. Her lips were dry, cracked at the corners. And her feet. Her bare feet on November concrete. Jordan turned off the engine. He got out of the car slowly, like a man approaching something he was afraid to startle. Mama. Her name came out broken, cracked down the middle, and she flinched when she heard it. Not from fear. From something worse. Recognition mixed with humiliation. She looked up at him and then immediately away, her jaw tightening, her eyes fixing on some point in the middle distance like she was trying to hold herself together through sheer geometric focus. "Jordan," she said, "what are you doing here?" Her voice was different. Quieter. Like it had been turned down by someone else's hand and hadn't found its volume again. "I came to see you." He was walking toward her now, slowly, across the dead grass of the front yard. "Mama, why are you sitting out here? It's freezing." "I'm fine." There it was. Fine. The word she'd been using like a lid for 14 months. "You're in a house dress." "I was just getting some air." May. He never called her May. The word came out sharp and full, a name, not a title, and it made her breath catch. "Look at me." She did. Slowly. Reluctantly. Like a woman who knew that once someone really looked at her, the lie wouldn't hold anymore. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Not from crying tonight, from something longer than tonight. The particular redness that comes from weeks of not sleeping right. Of swallowing things that should have been said. Of being quietly, persistently diminished. Jordan crouched down in front of her on the bottom step. Up close, she was worse. Her hands, those steady, capable hands, were trembling slightly in her lap. There were bruise-colored circles under her eyes. Her lips were pale. "When did you last eat?" he asked. She opened her mouth. "Don't say fine," he said quietly. She closed her mouth. A long pause. The wind moved through the elm tree at the edge of the yard, the one his father had planted the year Jordan was born, and a few dead leaves skittered across the porch. "Yesterday morning," she finally said. "I think. Yesterday morning." Jordan's jaw tightened so hard he felt it in his temples. He looked at the front door. Closed. He stood up and reached for the handle. Locked. He looked back at her. Mama. Why is the door locked? She didn't answer. Where's your key? Inside. How did you? He stopped. Started again. How long have you been out here? She looked down at her hands. Mama. How long? Since this morning, she whispered. Since this morning. Jordan stood very still for a moment. The math of it moved through him like cold water. The hours between morning and 6:47 p.m. on a November evening, a 61-year-old woman in a thin house dress, no food, no coat, no shoes, since this morning, and something shifted in his chest. Some tightly wound thing he'd been holding for 14 months began to come loose, and what replaced it was not sadness. It was rage. Quiet, controlled, devastatingly focused rage. Where is he? May's chin trembled. Mama. Where is Gerald? Jordan, don't. Is he inside? She pressed her lips together. Nodded. Once. Small. Gerald was inside. In May's house. In the house she had owned for 32 years, where she'd raised a child and buried a husband and kept the gutters clean herself because she was that kind of woman. Gerald was inside and May was outside and had been since morning in the cold with no food. Jordan turned toward the door. Jordan. May grabbed his wrist. Her grip was weaker than he remembered, and that broke something open in him all over its own. Please don't make it worse. He looked down at her hand on his wrist. He looked at her face. He sat back down on the step beside her instead. Not because he wasn't going to handle Gerald. He was. He absolutely was. But right now there was something more urgent than his anger. He shrugged off his jacket, the heavy canvas Carhartt he wore on job sites, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She stiffened, then sagged slightly, like warmth was a thing she'd forgotten she was allowed to have. He reached into the truck, grabbed the paper bag on the passenger seat, the gas station food he'd picked up outside of Springfield, a turkey sandwich and a bag of chips and a Snapple he hadn't drunk, and set it in her lap. May looked at it. Then she looked at him. And that was when she started to cry. Not dramatically. Not loudly. May had never been loud about her pain. She cried the way she did everything, quietly, efficiently, like she was trying not to take up too much space with it. Tears just slid down her face while her hands carefully, almost formally, unwrapped the plastic on the sandwich. She was so hungry. She ate like someone who'd been pretending she wasn't. Small careful bites at first, then less careful, and Jordan sat next to her on the cold steps and watched his mother eat a gas station turkey sandwich on her own locked-out porch and felt something inside him that he didn't have a word for. It wasn't quite grief. It wasn't quite guilt. It was something older and heavier than both. I left, he thought. I got my feelings hurt and I left, and I stopped looking past the word fine and I left. Mama, he said, when she was halfway through. Why didn't you call me? She chewed. Swallowed. Looked at the elm tree. Because I was ashamed, she said simply. The word dropped between them like a stone into water. Ashamed. Of what? His voice was barely above a whisper. She was quiet for a moment. Of what I let happen, she said. Of who I let in. Of what I asked you to do so I could let him in. She wrapped her hands around the Snapple bottle without opening it, just holding the coolness of it. Of all the times you called and I said fine. You knew something was wrong. A mother knows when her child knows. And I kept saying fine because I didn't want you to see what I'd turned into. You didn't turn into anything. I turned into a fool, Jordan. Her voice was still quiet, but there was something solid in it now, something that had broken through the humiliation. A lonely fool who let a man make her feel like she mattered, and then let that same man make her feel like she didn't deserve to walk through her own front door. Jordan was silent. He's been taking money, she continued, like a dam had finally given way and the water was coming whether she wanted it to or not. From my account. A little at first, so I almost missed it. Then more. When I said something 2 weeks ago, he got ugly. Moved into the bedroom. Started locking me out of rooms. Changed she stopped. Pressed her lips together. This morning he changed the front door code. Jordan stood up. Jordan. Call the police, Mama. His voice was calm. Terrifyingly calm. Right now. You call them, or I will, but somebody is calling them tonight. I don't want. May. He crouched in front of her again, took both her trembling hands in his, looked at her straight. He locked you out of your house. Your name is on the deed. You haven't eaten since yesterday. None of this is something we discuss. None of it. She looked at his face for a long time. Her boy. Her Jordan. Sitting in the cold dark in front of her, holding her hands that had held his 1,000 times the other direction, asking her to let him do what sons are supposed to do. She nodded. He pulled out his phone. The police came within 11 minutes. Gerald Booth came to the door in May's robe, her robe, with the particular bluster of a man who had grown too comfortable in a space that was never his. He spoke first, fast, the way practiced liars do. This is a domestic misunderstanding. She has a temper, I can explain. The officer looked at May. At the house dress. At her bare feet. At Jordan's jacket still around her shoulders. Then back at Gerald. Sir, whose name is on the deed to this property? Gerald's jaw shifted. Sir. Hers. Then I'm going to need you to step outside. It took 40 minutes. Jordan stood with his arm around May's shoulders, his arm solid and present, the way he should have been present 14 months ago, and watched Gerald Booth carry a single suitcase out of his mother's house and drive away in a car that had been parked in her driveway long enough to leave an oil stain on the concrete. May didn't watch Gerald leave. She watched the elm tree. When the police car finally pulled away, she let out a breath so long and so deep that Jordan felt it against his ribs. Like she'd been holding it for months. Like her body had been waiting for the precise moment it was safe to exhale. He squeezed her shoulder. She reached up and put her hand over his. Neither of them said anything. Inside, the house was warm. The lights were on. The refrigerator was nearly empty, but it was hers, and the locks. By the end of that night Jordan had changed them all, standing on a kitchen chair at 10 p.m. while May sat at the table wrapped in a blanket watching him work. The locks were theirs again. He made her scrambled eggs and toast. She ate every bite. The eggs were gone. The toast was gone. May had eaten with the quiet intensity of someone rediscovering something they'd convinced themselves they didn't need. Each bite careful, deliberate, like she was relearning the simple dignity of a warm meal at her own table. Jordan had washed the pan, dried it, hung it back on the hook above the stove the way she'd always kept it. Then he stood at the sink for a moment longer than necessary, hands braced on the edge of the counter, staring through the window above it into the dark backyard. The yard light was out. He made a mental note to replace the bulb. He was already making a list. Locks. Yard light. Refrigerator. He hadn't opened the cabinets yet, but he already knew what he would find, or wouldn't find, and the thought of it sat in his stomach like something swallowed wrong. Behind him he could hear May at the table. The small sounds of her, the soft scrape of the mug he'd made her tea in, the occasional clearing of her throat, the specific silence of a woman who had things to say and wasn't sure yet which ones were safe. He turned around and leaned against the counter. She was looking at him. You should call and tell your job you won't be in tomorrow, she said. Already texted Darius. She nodded slowly, wrapped both hands around her mug. You drove 4 hours. 4.5. There was construction outside of Springfield. You should sleep. I'm not tired. That wasn't entirely true. He was tired in the way that had nothing to do with sleep, the specific exhaustion of someone who has just spent several hours in a sustained state of controlled emergency. But sleep felt impossible right now. Felt like abandonment in miniature. May looked down at her tea. Jordan, she said. I need to say something, and I need you to let me say all of it before you respond. He crossed his arms. Nodded. She took a breath. I'm sorry. 2 words. Quiet. No decoration. I'm sorry for what I said to you 14 months ago. I'm sorry for the way I said it. I'm sorry for letting someone else put words in my mouth that should never have come out of it. She kept her eyes on the mug. You were living here, and you were good here. You paid your portion, you kept your space, you never once gave me a reason. And I stood in that living room and told you it was time to go because a man I'd known 8 months had decided my grown son was inconvenient to him. The kitchen was very quiet. I told myself I was doing you a favor, that I was encouraging your independence. A small, humorless exhale. I was lying to myself, so I didn't have to feel what I was actually doing. Jordan said nothing. He was holding his breath without meaning to. I kept saying fine on the phone because saying anything else meant admitting that I had traded my son for someone who never saw me as anything more than a comfortable arrangement. She looked up now. Straight at him. You asked me once, on one of our calls, you asked if everything was okay and you waited. You waited a long time after I said fine. I could feel you waiting. He remembered that call. March. He'd been sitting in the parking lot of a Sunoco station outside of Columbus, engine running, holding the phone so tight his knuckles ached. I wanted to tell you, she said. Every Sunday I wanted to tell you. But I'd already taken so much from you. I didn't want to take your peace too. Jordan unfolded his arms. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. For a moment he just looked at her, really looked, the way you look at someone when you're trying to reconcile who they are with who you thought they were. May Calloway, who had never once asked him for anything, sitting across from him in her own kitchen at 11 o'clock at night after a day that should never have happened, apologizing with the particular dignity of a woman who didn't grovel but meant every word. He rubbed his face with both hands. Mama. You don't have to forgive me tonight. That's not, he stopped. Started again. I'm not angry at you. She blinked. I'm angry at myself, he said. I'm angry that I heard something wrong in your voice for 14 months and talked myself out of it every single time. I'm angry that I let my pride, he pressed his mouth into a line. I was so hurt that I turned it into a reason to stay gone. And I dressed it up like respect. Like I was giving you the space you asked for. You were. I was hiding, he said flatly. In Columbus. In a studio apartment. Eating over a counter. Hiding behind, she's the one who asked me to leave, like that meant I didn't have to check on you. Like it excused 4-minute phone calls and deciding that fine meant fine. May was quiet. I should have come back sooner, he said. I should have come back after the first month. Should have driven up here and stood on this porch and said, Mama, something is wrong, I can hear it, tell me what's wrong. He looked at the table. I didn't. And you spent this morning locked outside in the cold because I didn't. Jordan, that is not your. It's both of ours, he said. That's what I'm saying. It's not yours alone and it's not mine alone, and I'm done with us pretending otherwise. The word us landed in the kitchen like something warm. May blinked again. Faster this time. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held it. They sat like that for a while. Not talking. Not needing to yet. Outside, the November wind had picked up, moving through the elm tree with a low sound that was almost a voice. The refrigerator hummed. The old clock on the kitchen wall, the rooster-shaped one he had always thought was hideous and she had always loved, ticked steadily. Home sounds. Specific, irreplaceable home sounds that his studio apartment in Columbus would never have. He noticed, gradually, that something was wrong with the kitchen itself. Not emotionally. Physically. The small things a person who lived here wouldn't notice, but a person returning after 14 months would. The cabinet door hanging slightly off its hinge. The crack running through the tile near the back door that hadn't been there before. The curtain above the sink, hanging crooked on a rod that had pulled halfway out of the wall. He thought about Gerald Booth and his bluster and his borrowed robe. He thought about a little money at first, so I almost missed it. He thought about his mother, who had spent 31 years building and maintaining and protecting this house, sitting on the front steps in November because a man she trusted had changed the door code. The quiet rage from earlier hadn't gone anywhere. He'd just set it aside for more urgent things. It came back now, low and steady, like a pilot light. Mama, he said carefully. I want to talk about the money. She tensed. Not tonight, she said. Please. I know. Not tonight. He gave her hand a small squeeze. But soon. Because what he did has a name and there are people whose job it is to handle it and we are going to let them. She didn't agree. But she didn't argue. Which from May was practically a yes. He slept in his old room that night. It didn't look the way he'd left it. Of course it didn't. May had repainted at some point. The dark blue he'd chosen at 17 replaced with a neutral beige that felt like Gerald's influence somehow, like the erasure of small things. The shelves were bare. His books, his track trophies, the framed photo of him and his father at a Cubs game, all of it gone. Boxed somewhere, presumably. Or perhaps just removed. He lay on the bed that was too short for him now. It had always been too short. He'd always hung off the end, and May had always threatened to get him a bigger one and never had. And he stared at the beige ceiling and listened to the house. He could hear her moving around in her room. The soft footfalls. The creak of her bed when she finally settled. The silence after. He waited until he was sure she was still. Not asleep, but still. And then he said quietly, to no one, to the ceiling, to the 14 months he couldn't get back. "I'm here now." He was up before her. He'd made a list on his phone by 6 a.m. hardware store, grocery store, cabinet hinges, tile adhesive, curtain rod. He'd already looked up financial exploitation of elders in Illinois and bookmarked 2 pages and a phone number for the state's Adult Protective Services. He was standing at the stove when she came downstairs. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. He was making oatmeal. He'd found a packet of it in the back of the cabinet, behind an expired can of soup and a jar of honey that was real enough to still pour. She watched him for a moment. "You found the honey," she said. "You always hid it behind stuff, so you wouldn't eat it straight from the jar." A small sound came from her. Not quite a laugh, but the shape of one. She came and sat at the table. He set the oatmeal in front of her with a spoon and sat across from her with his coffee and watched her eat the way he had watched her the night before. Not hovering, not pitying, just present. Bearing witness to the simple act of his mother eating breakfast in her own kitchen on a Wednesday morning. She was almost finished when she said, without looking up, "He's going to make trouble." Jordan wrapped his hands around his mug. "Gerald," she said, "he doesn't let go of things easily. He'll say things. About the money, about what happened. He'll make it sound." "He can say whatever he wants," Jordan said. "His name isn't on anything. He'll say I invited it. That I. Mama." His voice was quiet but absolute. "Let him talk. You've got a son, a police report, a bank statement, and a deed with only your name on it. He's got a borrowed robe and an oil stain in your driveway. Let him talk." May looked up at him. Something moved through her face that he hadn't seen in a long time. Not relief exactly. Something that came just before relief. The moment a person begins to believe, cautiously and with the particular care of someone who's been wrong before, that maybe this time it's actually going to be okay. She looked back down at her oatmeal. "Don't let me run you off again," she said quietly. To the bowl. To herself. To him. "Not possible," he said. She didn't say anything else. But she finished her oatmeal. He was at the hardware store by 9 when his phone rang. Unknown number. Illinois area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. He didn't. "Is this Jordan Calloway?" "It is." "Mr. Calloway, my name is Detective Reeves with the Mill Haven PD Financial Crimes Unit. We received a report this morning regarding a Gerald Booth. I understand you were present last evening when—" "Yes," Jordan said. "We'd like you to come in, sir. And we'd like to speak with your mother." He stood in the hardware store aisle with cabinet hinges in one hand and his phone in the other, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and felt a particular sensation of a situation both resolving and expanding at the same time. Gerald had made trouble already. But so had Jordan. The difference was Jordan had made the right kind. "We'll be there at noon," he said. "If this story is sitting with you, please subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from." The Mill Haven Police Department smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Jordan noticed these things the way he always noticed details in unfamiliar spaces, cataloging them automatically, a habit from years of walking into strangers' homes for work, reading a space before he read the people in it. Water damage on the ceiling tile above the front desk. A motivational poster on the wall that had been there long enough to fade. A plastic fern in the corner that was somehow both dusty and optimistic. May sat beside him in a plastic chair with her hands folded in her lap and her posture perfect. She had dressed carefully this morning. A navy blue cardigan he recognized from years back, pressed slacks, her good flats. She had combed her hair and put on the small gold earrings she wore to church. She looked from the outside, composed and dignified. He knew what it cost her. He had watched her stand in front of the bathroom mirror before they left, gripping the edge of the sink, taking slow measured breaths like someone preparing to walk into something that required every piece of herself to be in the right place. He had stood in the hallway and said nothing because some preparations are private, and a good son knows when to give his mother the room to gather herself. He had handed her her coat when she came out. She had taken it without a word. Detective Reeves was a compact woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and the practiced gentleness of someone who had sat across from too many people in bad situations to perform sympathy anymore. She just had it, plainly and without theater. She set a folder on the table between them. "Mrs. Calloway, I want to start by telling you something." May's hands tightened in her lap. "What Mr. Booth did has a name. It's called elder financial exploitation, and it is a felony in the state of Illinois. You are not the first person he has done this to." The air in the room shifted. Jordan turned to look at May. May was looking at the folder. "There's another woman," Detective Reeves continued carefully. "In Decatur. 64 years old. He was with her for 7 months in 2021. She lost approximately $18,000 before she realized what was happening." "How much," Jordan said slowly, "did he take from my mother?" Detective Reeves looked at May. May opened her mouth. Closed it. Her jaw moved slightly, like she was calculating whether the number would sound as bad out loud as it did in her head. $11,400, she said. "That I can account for. There may be more." The number sat on the table between all three of them. $11,400. Jordan stared at the wall. He did not look at his mother because he knew that if he looked at her right now, his face would show something she would interpret as judgment, and it was not judgment. It was grief. It was fury at a man who had looked at a lonely widow who still kept butterscotch candy in her cardigan, and had seen not a person but a transaction. "Mrs. Calloway," Detective Reeves said, "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them as completely as you can. I know it's uncomfortable. I know some of it will feel like you're saying things about yourself that are hard to say. But the most important thing you can do right now is tell me everything." May straightened slightly in her chair. "I understand," she said. And then May Calloway, who had spent 14 months being quietly, systematically diminished, who had said fine into a phone every Sunday while sitting in her own house with a man who was slowly emptying it, began to talk. Jordan listened. He had told himself he knew the broad shape of it. He didn't. The broad shape was one thing. The details were another. The details were May describing how Gerald had started small, offering to help with bills, handling the mail, such a gentleman, her church friends had said. The details were May explaining that the first time she'd noticed money missing she had genuinely wondered if she'd miscounted, because Gerald had been so calm when she raised it, so reasonable, so "Honey, you've been forgetful lately, remember last Tuesday?" The details were May saying, with her eyes fixed on the table and her voice level as a woman who has decided that telling the truth is worth the cost of telling it. "He made me feel like I was losing my mind." That was the one that hit Jordan in the sternum. He made me feel like I was losing my mind. He kept his hands very still in his lap. He kept his face neutral. He did not say what he was thinking, which was that he would like 5 uninterrupted minutes with Gerald Booth in a room with no cameras, which was not a productive thought, and he was aware of that, and he set it aside in the specific mental drawer where he put things he couldn't act on. May talked for 40 minutes. Detective Reeves took notes and asked clarifying questions with the quiet efficiency of someone doing the work they were meant to do. When May finished, she folded her hands in her lap again. She looked somehow, both more exhausted and more like herself. Like saying it out loud had been a kind of surgery, painful and necessary and the beginning of something getting better. "You did the right thing coming in," Detective Reeves said. "Both of you." She looked at Jordan. "Mr. Calloway, you showed up at the right time." Jordan said nothing. He didn't feel like he'd shown up at the right time. He felt like he'd shown up at the last possible time. The distinction mattered to him even if nobody else in the room was making it. They were quiet on the drive home. May looked out the passenger window at Millhaven moving past. The familiar storefronts, the Catholic church steeple, the Dairy Queen on Route 9 with its marquee sign advertising a seasonal peppermint shake. "You're thinking it was your fault," May said. He glanced at her. "You've had that face since the detective said I'd been forgetful." She kept looking out the window. "That's not your fault, Jordan. A man who makes a woman doubt her own mind is very good at what he does. That's not a reflection of my weakness or your absence. That's a reflection of his practice." Jordan's hands adjusted on the wheel. "I hear you," he said, "but you don't believe it yet." "Not entirely." She nodded. Neither do I, she said quietly. He looked at her. But I think we'll get there, she said. He spent the afternoon fixing things. That was how Jordan processed, with his hands. With measurable, visible, correctable problems. He was not a man who journaled or talked at length or processed grief in organized emotional stages. He processed it by doing things that needed doing. He replaced the cabinet hinge. He repaired the curtain rod. He filled the crack in the kitchen tile with adhesive and let it set. He replaced the yard light bulb and tested it, a small yellow circle pushing back the dark outside the back door, and stood there for a moment looking at it with his arms crossed like he'd accomplished something significant, which maybe he had, in the way that small repairs to the places we love are always significant. May sat at the kitchen table and watched him for a while. Then she got up. She went to the hall closet and came back with a shoebox. She set it on the table and sat down. Jordan glanced at it from across the kitchen. "What's that?" "Come sit down," she said. He washed his hands and sat. She opened the shoebox. Inside, carefully layered the way May layered everything, were photographs. Letters. A folded piece of notebook paper that had been folded and unfolded so many times it had gone soft at the creases. A Cubs ticket stub. A child's drawing in crayon. A house, 2 figures. A sun with more rays than made geometric sense, the way children's suns always have. "He put your things in boxes," May said. "Gerald. He told me you'd want them. I let him box them." She smoothed her hand over the edge of the shoebox. "But I went through the boxes before they went anywhere. And I kept the things that were yours in ways he wouldn't understand." Jordan looked at the shoebox. "That drawing," May said, touching the edge of it without picking it up. "You made that when you were 5. You told me the tall figure was your dad and the short one was me, and I asked what the giant sun was, and you said, 'That's just the sun, Mama. It's always that big, you just can't see it because it's too bright.'" Jordan looked at the drawing. He didn't trust his voice right now, so he didn't use it. "The ticket stub is from the last game your father took you to," May said. "September 2009. You were 16. They lost, but you told me it was the best day of your life, and your father was so proud of that. So proud that you could have the best day of your life at a losing game. He talked about it for weeks." Jordan picked up the ticket stub. Worn at the edges. Soft. The numbers still legible. September 14th. Section 204. He pressed his lips together. "Mama." "I have something else," she said. She reached into the shoebox and lifted out the folded piece of notebook paper. She held it for a moment without unfolding it, her thumbs moving over the soft creases. "I wrote this 3 months ago," she said. "At 2 in the morning. Gerald was asleep and I was sitting at this table because I couldn't sleep and I wrote you a letter. I wrote you everything I just said at the police station plus everything I couldn't bring myself to say there." She set it on the table between them. "I never sent it." The kitchen was very still. "I kept telling myself I'd send it when I found a way to say it right," she said. "But the right way kept not coming. And the weeks kept going. And the Sundays kept happening." Her voice had gone quiet and careful. "And then yesterday happened." Jordan looked at the letter. "Can I read it?" She pushed it toward him. He unfolded it carefully. May's handwriting, her particular looping cursive, the same handwriting that had signed his permission slips and written notes in his lunch bag and addressed Christmas cards for 30 years, filled both sides of the paper. He read. He read it all. It took a while, and May sat across from him and let him take the time and didn't watch his face, giving him the same private room he'd given her in the hallway that morning. When he finished, he folded it back along its original creases. He set it down. He cleared his throat once. "Mama," he said, "I need to tell you something too." She looked at him. "The night I left," he said, "when I packed that box. I sat in the car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I drove away. I kept thinking, go back. Go knock on the door and say something. Say, I don't understand why you're doing this, I'm not ready to go, something feels wrong and I need you to tell me what it is." May's eyes glistened. "But I didn't. Because I convinced myself that you'd made your choice and that going back was begging and I'd been raised to have too much dignity to beg." He let out a slow breath. "And that was wrong. Some things are worth begging for. Some doors are worth knocking on twice." Silence. "I should have knocked," he said. May pressed her hand to her mouth. Then she stood up and came around the table, and she did what she probably should have done the night before when he'd shown up in those headlights. She put her arms around her son, who was 27 years old and sitting at her kitchen table with a Cubs ticket stub in his hand and 14 months of accumulated distance finally coming apart, and she held on. He let her. He held her back. His chin went down to the top of her head the way it had since he passed her in height at 14, the way it had every hug since, that specific architecture of the two of them, and he felt her shoulders shaking slightly, quietly May style, and he tightened his arms. "I've got you," he said. Into her hair. "I'm not going anywhere." She nodded against his chest. Outside, through the kitchen window, the elm tree moved in the wind. The yard light, the one he'd fixed, held steady against the dark. Later that evening, after soup he'd made from what he'd found at the grocery store, a real soup, with vegetables and stock and the cornbread she'd always made from the box but insisted tasted homemade, they sat in the living room. May was in her chair. Jordan was on the couch. The television was on, but neither of them was watching it. "What are you going to do?" May asked. "About Columbus. I've got vacation time saved." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her sideways. She looked back with a specific expression of a mother who has earned the right to ask the question plainly. "I don't know yet," he said. "I know I'm staying through this. Through whatever happens with Gerald and the investigation and getting the money sorted. I'm here for all of that. And after." He was quiet. "There's HVAC companies in Millhaven," he said carefully. May said nothing, but the corner of her mouth moved. Barely. The ghost of something. "I'm just saying," he said. "There's companies here." I looked. "When did you look?" "At the hardware store. This morning. While I was on hold with the cabinet hinge people." May made a sound that was absolutely a laugh, small and involuntary, and the most beautiful sound Jordan had heard in 14 months. He smiled. She covered it by reaching for her tea. He let her. Have you ever sat in a room with someone you love and felt the distance between you finally start to close? The call came on a Thursday morning. Jordan was on the roof. He had noticed the day before that 2 shingles above the back porch were lifting, November wind getting underneath them, curling the edges up like the pages of an old book, and he had added it to the list and then moved it to the top of the list because rain was forecast for the weekend and May's ceiling did not need another problem. He was up there with a nail gun and a tube of roofing sealant when his phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. He almost let it go. He didn't. "Mr. Calloway." "Detective Reeves. I want to give you a heads up before you hear it another way. Gerald Booth retained an attorney this morning." Jordan set the nail gun down on the slope of the roof. "His attorney is claiming your mother invited him to live there as a long-term partner, that any financial transactions were consensual gifts, and that you showed up Tuesday night and intimidated him out of the property." The cold air moved around him. "He's filing a civil harassment claim against you," she said. "And he's contesting the police report." Jordan was quiet for a moment. "Is that going to affect the investigation?" "No. The financial evidence is solid. We pulled the bank records yesterday, and there are 17 transactions over 9 months that are consistent with exploitation patterns we've documented before." A pause. "But I want you prepared. His attorney is going to try to make this ugly. They're going to say things about your mother. About her mental state, her judgment, they're going to try to reframe her as a willing participant." Jordan picked the nail gun back up. Not to use it. Just to have something in his hand. "Let them," he said. "Mr. Calloway. We have 17 transactions, a police report, a woman indicator, and a door code he changed on a house with her name on the deed." His voice was steady. "Let his attorney talk." A brief pause. "I just wanted you prepared," Detective Reeves said. "We're prepared." He hung up. He sat on the roof for a moment. Below him, through the kitchen window, he could see May at the table. She was writing something, a list or a letter, he couldn't tell. Her reading glasses on. Her cardigan sleeves pushed up slightly. Just his mother at her kitchen table in the morning light, doing the ordinary small things of being alive in her own home. He watched her for a moment. Then he went back to fixing the shingles. He didn't tell her right away. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, which was partly true. He was also, he admitted to himself while pretending to watch the evening news, trying to figure out how to hand her something hard without it landing like a blow. May knew anyway. She always had. "What did Detective Reeves say?" she asked, during a commercial. He looked at her. She was looking at the television. "He got a lawyer," Jordan said. "I expected that. They're going to try to make it look like the money was gifts. That you were a willing." "I expected that too." He studied her profile. The way her jaw was set. The way her hands were resting open in her lap rather than folded tight, relaxed, not braced. "You're not scared," he said. Slightly surprised. She turned to look at him. "I'm terrified," she said simply. "But I've been scared and quiet for 14 months. I don't have any more quiet left in me for Gerald Booth." Jordan held her gaze. "Okay," he said. "I want to call a lawyer tomorrow," she said. "Not just the police. I want my own lawyer. Someone who is specifically mine." "I already looked some up," he said. "There's a woman in town, Patrice Odom. She specializes in elder law and financial exploitation. She's got good reviews. I can call in the morning." May blinked. "You already looked." "This afternoon. On the roof." She made the sound again, that small involuntary laugh she kept trying to contain, and shook her head slowly. "You were fixing my roof and researching lawyers." "I multitask." She shook her head again, but the laugh had become a smile that she wasn't trying to contain anymore. "Gerald made his move on Friday. Not legally. Not yet. He showed up." Jordan was at the grocery store when May called. He picked up on the first ring and heard it immediately in her breathing, that careful, controlled quality that meant she was holding something down. "He's outside," she said. "In the driveway. Just sitting in his car." Jordan was already moving toward the exit, cart abandoned in the cereal aisle. "Don't go outside," he said. "Don't open the door." "Are the locks?" "The new locks are on." "I'm not going outside, Jordan. I didn't fall off a turnip truck." A different day, that might have made him laugh. "I'm 12 minutes away," he said. "I'm coming. Call 911 if he gets out of the car." "He's just sitting there. He probably wants to." "Call 911 if he gets out of the car," Jordan repeated. "Mama. Promise me." A pause. "I promise." He drove faster than was strictly legal and arrived to find Gerald's car still in the driveway, Gerald still inside it, doing nothing in the particular aggressive way that people who want to frighten you do nothing. Performative stillness, the presence itself as a threat. Jordan parked, got out, and walked to the driver's side window. Gerald looked up at him. Up close, without the borrowed robe and the bluster of Tuesday night, Gerald Booth looked smaller. Not physically. He was still a big man, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had probably coasted on physical presence his whole life. But something about the daylight was unkind to him. His eyes had the slightly unfocused quality of a man who had spent the last 3 days recalculating. Jordan stood at the window and said nothing. Gerald spoke first, which Jordan had expected. "I just want to talk to May." "She doesn't want to talk to you." "That's for her to say." "She said it to me," Jordan said. "So it's been said." Gerald's jaw tightened. "You've turned her against me. You showed up here and—" "You changed the door code on her house," Jordan said. "You left her outside in November without food or shoes. You took $11,000 from a woman who trusted you." He paused. "I didn't turn her against you, Gerald. You did that yourself, slowly, over 9 months, and you did it so well she was ashamed to call her own son. So I need you to hear this clearly." He leaned down slightly. "There is a lawyer named Patrice Odom who is going to make the next several months of your life very specific and very uncomfortable. There is a detective named Reeves who has your bank records. There is a woman in Decatur who is prepared to speak to what you did to her." He held Gerald's gaze. "And there is me, who is not going anywhere. So whatever you came here to do, whatever you thought sitting in this driveway was going to accomplish, it's done. It accomplished nothing. Go home, Gerald." Gerald stared at him. His mouth opened. Closed. He started the car. Jordan stepped back. He stood in the driveway and watched Gerald Booth reverse out onto Birchwood Lane and drive away, and he kept watching until the car had turned the corner and disappeared, and then he stood there another moment in the cold air, just breathing, before he turned and walked to the front door. May opened it before he knocked. She had been watching from the window. She stepped back to let him in, and he came inside, and she closed the door behind him, and they stood in the front hallway, and she put her hand flat on his chest for a moment. Not a hug, just a hand, just her palm over his heartbeat, and said, "Thank you." He put his hand over hers. "He's not coming back," Jordan said. She nodded once, firmly, like a woman deciding to believe something. "He's not coming back," she agreed. The weeks that followed were not cinematic. They were not a montage of healing moments scored to soft music. They were ordinary and sometimes tedious and occasionally hard in the small persistent way that real recovery is hard. Patrice Odom was sharp and methodical and had seen Gerald's type before. She filed a civil suit on May's behalf within 2 weeks. The financial exploitation investigation moved forward steadily, the kind of institutional grinding that is unglamorous and necessary and takes longer than anyone wants. Gerald's harassment claim went nowhere. It went nowhere the way thin lies go nowhere when they meet solid documentation, quietly, without ceremony. May had good days and harder days. There were nights Jordan heard her up at 2 a.m., not in distress, just awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her tea, working something through. He would come downstairs sometimes, and she would look up and he would make himself a cup and sit across from her, and they would talk, or not talk, and both things were equally useful. She started going back to church. Not immediately. The first Sunday she sat in the driveway in the car for 5 minutes before going in, because Gerald had attended that church, had sat in those pews, had charmed those people, and walking back in was a reclamation that required preparation. Jordan drove her. Sat beside her in the third pew from the front. Shook hands with people whose faces opened with something real when they saw May back in her place. She held her head level the entire service. Afterward, in the car, she was quiet for a long time. "How was that?" Jordan asked. "Hard," she said. "You want to go next week?" "Yes," she said without hesitating. He nodded and pulled out of the parking lot, and she reached over and turned the radio to the gospel station she liked, and they drove home through Millhaven in the late morning light with the music filling the car. Jordan called his boss in Columbus on a Wednesday. He'd been putting it off, not from uncertainty, but from the particular human tendency to delay the moment when a decision you've already made becomes official. Saying it out loud would make it real, and real was permanent, and permanent required a kind of courage that had nothing to do with Gerald Booth or police reports. It had to do with a studio apartment and a kitchen counter and the careful life he had built around being gone. He sat in his old room, the beige room which he was going to repaint, he'd already decided, back to something that felt like him, and he called. "Rivera," his boss answered. "It's Calloway. I need to talk to you about something." A pause. "You taking more time?" "I'm taking permanent time," Jordan said. "I'm transferring my license to Illinois. I've got a meeting with a company here next week." Silence. "Your mama," Rivera said. Not a question. "Yeah." Rivera was quiet for a moment. "You're good at what you do, Calloway. You know that." "I do." "Illinois' loss," Rivera said. "Our loss." A pause. "She okay?" "Getting there." "Good." A beat. "Come by and get your tools before the end of the month." "And Calloway, good man." Jordan sat with the phone in his hand for a moment after they hung up. Good man. He didn't know if that was true yet. He knew it was something he was working toward. He knew that good man was not a fixed point you arrived at, but a direction you kept choosing, in small moments, on cold November nights, at the bottom of a porch step, in the returning. He set his phone down on the bed. From downstairs he could hear May in the kitchen. The sounds of her, a cabinet opening and closing, the particular rhythm of her moving through her own space with the ease of a woman who had reclaimed it. The radio she'd started keeping on in the afternoons, low gospel and old soul, sound filling the rooms the way presence fills rooms. He sat there for a moment and just listened. The first snow came on a Saturday in December. Not heavy. Just enough to coat the grass and settle on the branches of the elm tree and make Birchwood Lane look like the kind of street that gets photographed for Christmas cards. May noticed it first. She was at the kitchen window with her coffee when she called out to him, "Jordan, come look," with a lightness in her voice that reminded him so specifically of childhood that it stopped him in the hallway for half a second before he went. He stood beside her at the window. The yard light he'd replaced was still on from the night before, throwing a circle of yellow onto the white dusted grass. The elm tree had a line of snow along each branch, every branch, intricate and specific, the tree suddenly articulated in white. Your father planted that tree the October you were born, May said. He said he wanted something that would grow with you. Jordan looked at the tree. He was 27 years old, and the tree was taller than the house. He did a good job, Jordan said. May made a soft sound beside him. He really did, she said. They stood at the window together for a while. The snow kept falling. Small, steady flakes that made no sound. The tree held its white lines. The yard light held its circle. After a moment, May reached out and took his hand. Not the way she had in a crisis. Not the way she had on the cold porch steps. The way she used to when he was small and they were looking at something together. A sunset, a parade, something ordinary made briefly extraordinary by the shared act of noticing it. He held on. 3 months later, a Sunday in February, Jordan was under a kitchen sink in a house on the other side of Millhaven, repairing a pipe joint that had corroded through, when his phone lit up with a text from May. It was a photo. She was standing in front of the elm tree in the front yard, her good coat on, her hair done, her face in the particular expression she made when she was trying not to look pleased with herself and failing completely. Below the photo, the text read, Patrice Cold. The judge ruled in our favor. He read it twice. He sat back against the cabinet under the sink and read it twice more. Then he called her. She picked up on the first ring. Mama. They're making it right, she said. Her voice had that quality again, not the thin, careful voice of the Sundays, not the controlled voice of the police station. Her voice. Full and warm and May. They're making it right, he repeated. Not all of it. Not, you can't make all of it right. But enough. A pause. Enough to matter. He pressed his free hand against the cabinet floor and felt the solid wood of it. Mama, he said. I need to tell you something. Tell me. I'm glad I came back. A long pause. Baby, she said softly. I have been glad every single day. He sat under a stranger's kitchen sink in Millhaven, Illinois, on a Sunday in February, with a corroded pipe in one hand and his phone in the other, and smiled so wide it almost hurt. I'll be home for dinner, he said. I'm making pot roast. Mama. What? Make enough for 3 days. She laughed. Her Rayal laugh, the full one, the one he'd grown up with, the one that filled rooms and embarrassed him as a teenager and that he had spent 14 months missing without fully admitting he was missing it. It came through the phone and filled the space under the kitchen sink and probably the whole house and maybe, if the window was open, the street. He stayed on the line a moment longer than necessary just to keep hearing it. Then he went back to fixing the pipe. If this story reached something in you, if you thought of your mother or your son or someone you left or someone who left you, please subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.